One of the most famous images of the reader in the world's literature is that of Don Quixote, who allegedly read such a huge number of books that his brains got so dry that he lost his wits. Now the question is, would he have gone mad if he were reading detective novels? If we think about it, detective novels are a truly therapeutic genre. They always start with a mess, with some mystery, a murder, filth, and chaos. But they slowly and surely always create order out of the chaos. They solve the mystery, find the criminal, and make the world a place a little bit cleaner. This is something that makes this kind of novel very different from the other kinds of novels and literature, because very often literature doesn't give any solutions to anything, even if it pretends to do so. About this, Jorge Luis Borges was writing the following. What could we say as an apology for the detective genre? There is one that is very evident and certain: our literature tends to be chaotic. It tends to free verse because it is easier than regular verse. We tend to suppress characters, plots. Everything is very vague. In this chaotic turmoil, there's something that, humbly, has kept the classical virtues, the detective story. I would say, to defend this detective novel, that it needs no defense, though read with a certain disdain nowadays, it is safeguarding order in an age of disorder. This is a feat for which we should be grateful. But at the same time as the mainstream detective novels serve this function of creating order, there are certain other books that pretend to belong to the detective genre only to subvert its laws. One of such novels is Paul Auster's The City of Glass, included in the New York trilogy, and which has also been adapted into an amazing graphical novel. Today in this video I'll try to show how this novel undermines every conceivable way of following the laws of the detective genre. And first things first, what about the plot? The book tells us about a relatively successful detective novelist, Daniel Quinn, who one day by some strange coincidence receives a call which asks for one Paul Auster, weirdly the same name as the author of the book, and asks him to help with an investigation. Daniel Quinn hesitates for a few days, but then decides to pretend he is Paul Auster and deal with the case on his own. And the case is that a young man, Peter Stillman, is afraid of being killed by his father, who is about to go out of prison. So far so good, but with each page you get to have more and more doubts if it's actually a detective story and if it's leading to any resolution. Auster gives us many facts, details, phrases that seem like they're supposed to reveal something, but they actually don't. The author is simply playing with the reader. In one of the episodes, Auster ironizes on that point by saying that in the good mystery there is nothing wasted, no sentence, no word that is not significant, and even if it is not significant, it has the potential to be so, which amounts to the same thing. The world of the book comes to life, seething with possibilities, with secrets and contradictions. Since everything seen or said, even the slightest, most trivial thing can bear a connection to the outcome of the story, nothing must be overlooked. Everything becomes essence. The center of the book shifts with each event that propels it forward. The center, then, is everywhere, and no circumference can be drawn until the book has come to its end. There is nothing like that in this novel. Very few things become essence, and nothing comes to a logical end. This is probably the most prominent feature of the novel that undermines the detective genre as it is. A normal detective novel is about starting with the unknown, with chaos, and slowly moving towards understanding, towards knowing, and towards order. This novel also starts with chaos and randomness, with a coincidental phone call, but doesn't move towards understanding and gets bogged down in chaos even more with each page. It also means a completely different relation towards chance, because a regular detective story would start with something that seems random and illogical and something that cannot be explained, but then the rational detective would find a way to prove that all that has happened didn't do so by chance, but was a result of very logical sequences of events. In The City of Glass, on the other hand, nothing is sorted out and chance remains to be chance even by the end of the novel, about which the narrator says, much later when he was able to think about the things that happened to him, he would conclude that nothing was real except chance. And when he says nothing was real, he means it literally, because not only the world around, but also the detective himself would fall into the realm of fiction. Hello, my name is Daniel Quinn, but it's best if you call me simply Paul Auster from the Auster Detective Agency. I'm currently investigating the possible murder of one Peter Stillman, a very strange case and a secret one, so let's keep it between us. As you see, I'm not really a professional detective, I don't have a hat, but despite that I managed to deal with the case quite smoothly. I'm really about to get it done. Some people though compare me with Don Quixote, and I really don't understand that. I'm not a madman or anything, the only books I've read are Jordan Peterson. You shouldn't really trust that guy because no one really knows much about him except that he's a writer and pretends to be a private detective. The narrator even told me in secret. As for Quinn, there is little that need detain us. Who he was, where he came from, and what he did are of no great importance. So the real Daniel Quinn isn't really what matters instead is the fictional Quinn, the Quinn who lives according to the laws of his characters from his detective novels. Paul Auster is very ironic about him copying his character's Max Werk's behavior. Then he thought about what Max Werk might have been thinking had he been there. He decided to light a cigarette. And indeed, the whole novel, Daniel Quinn tries to be someone he's not. With each page he fictionalizes himself more and more. In a way, we can say that he is doubly fictional. First, he's fictional because he is a character in a novel of Paul Auster, but secondly, he's fictional even inside the novel itself because of the way he ceases to be real in order for his character to become real, something which he himself acknowledges by saying, he had of course long ago stopped thinking of himself as real. If he lived out now in the world at all, it was only at one remove through the imaginary person of Max Werk. His detective necessarily had to be real. This double fictionality is what makes him similar to Don Quixote from the novel of Miguel de Cervantes. Just as the ingenious gentleman Daniel Quinn, who shares the initials with Don Quixote, also loses track of the dividing line between reality and fantasy. He loses the boundary between his life and his books. And that double fictionality seems to be the exact reason why both characters eventually die in both novels. It's because they are no longer able to continue living in the fantasy. But if for Don Quixote that happens because of his disillusionment in the fictional world of the chivalric romances, Daniel Quinn from Auster's novel dies as soon as the notebook where he writes down his life events ends, so that the last line he manages to write before his disappearance is, "What will happen when there are no more pages in the red notebook?" In the same way that the detective isn't really a detective, the criminal in this novel, Peter Stillman, also isn't really a criminal. Although he is suspected of wanting to kill his child, also called Peter Stillman, he actually appears to be the last person who would want to break the law. The thing is that the man wants to recreate the order that existed before the fall of the Tower of Babel, and he wants to achieve that by the means of changing language. He argues that the biggest trouble that the fall of Babel brought was that the people started to use words in ways that they aren't supposed to be used. He gives the example of an umbrella and wonders, should it still be called by the word umbrella if it doesn't serve its function as an umbrella any longer? He wonders, what happens when a thing no longer performs its function? Is it still the thing, or has it become something else? When you rip the cloth off the umbrella, is the umbrella still an umbrella? You open the spokes, put them over your head, walk out into the rain, and you get drenched. Is it possible to go on calling this object an umbrella? In general, people do. At the very limit, they will say the umbrella is broken. To me, this is a serious error, the source of all our troubles, because it can no longer perform its function. The umbrella has ceased to be an umbrella. It might resemble an umbrella, it might once have been an umbrella, but now it has changed into something else. To fix that, Stillman decides to give new names to what he calls the broken people, the broken things, the broken thoughts, and by doing this recreate the linguistic order that existed at the times before Babel. Now, this point about language has some implications both in the plot of the novel and overall in the philosophy of language, but what matters for this video is that Peter, who's supposed to be the criminal, actually does nothing criminal in the events of the novel and instead wants to bring more order into the disordered New York. This makes him another character who overthrows the cliches of the detective genre. Well, since there is no criminal, there is really no victim, so I have to skip this one, along with the murder scene, the detective body, the wrong suspect, secret rooms, helpless police and undercover agent, blackmailing, rain, thunder, running down the stairs, the witness who knows too much, the witness who knows too little, fancy food, a car chase, a shooting scene. And pass right to discussing the reader, because that's one thing this novel still has. Hi, I'm the reader. This is my review of The City of Glass by Paul Auster. Now, I didn't like the book. Someone told me in the bookstore that it's a detective novel, which I like, so I bought it. I started reading it, but it's not leading to anything. What do all those plot lines have to do with the detective line? The author clearly doesn't know anything about the genre. The detective is fake, the criminal looks like he's just got a PhD in philosophy, then there's this stupid umbrella. I don't understand. The author just gives too many details that freak me out. There were almost 2 pages which were describing nearly each step the character took on his walk, and I remember the previous episode where the character put all those on a map and found out that those added up to some phrase, and I thought maybe the author wants us to also paint the path that the character takes as well. So I did it, and you know what? It looked like a huge I want my money back and an apology personally from the author. The author is hiding from the reader, I'm speaking for him. Just as the detective, the author in this novel is also fictionalized, but we cannot quite say he is real because Paul Auster is at once the author of the novel I'm speaking about, but he's also the private detective the main character pretends to be, and at the same time he's also one Paul Auster who isn't a detective, but a writer of a book on Don Quixote. All of this naming confusion gets us to wonder who is Paul Auster, how do we define Paul Auster? Is it a man with a biography and a life, or is it rather a function, in this case a function that relates the name Paul Auster to the book he's written or the characters he's created? In the case of the novel, the character and author distinction matters a lot, because as I've already mentioned before, the character becomes more real than the author, like in the case of Daniel Quinn, who wants to behave like his character Max Work. This is one more time when Don Quixote steps in, because the same thing happens in Cervantes' novel, which is presented to be a Spanish translation from the Arabic original written by a person that doesn't exist, but that original is also probably based on the originals told by a witness of the events themselves, and the only witness who could be sane enough to do that was Don Quixote's companion Sancho Panza. So it appears that the author of this book is not the ingenious Miguel de Cervantes, but his character, ingenious Sancho Panza. In this way, we are finally able to solve one of the main murder mysteries of literature studies, that about the death of the author, reported by Roland Barthes. The author is dead, it appears, because he was killed by his character, which is also the only kind of murder that happens on the pages of Paul Auster's novel, The City of Glass. Thank you all for investigating this no doubt difficult case with me. I hope that you've enjoyed it. If you have, I'd appreciate your likes, comments and subscriptions. If you haven't, I would still appreciate your likes, comments and subscriptions. It was the Mimesis, and see you next time.